My daughter-in-law looked me straight in the eyes and said, "I already prepared your grave. Now hurry up and die." I wish I could say I misunderstood her. I wish I could say it was a cruel joke. But I remember the way she smiled when she said it. Slow, cold, almost satisfied. My name is Margaret Collins. I'm 78 years old, and until 6 months ago, I believed I had raised a good son and built a peaceful family. Now I know how wrong I was. But before I tell you how everything ended, and how justice finally found its way back to me, I need you to hear the whole story. So if you're listening right now, please subscribe to the channel and stay with me until the end, because what happened next is something I never imagined possible in my quiet little life. And maybe, just maybe, my story will remind you that even the weakest voice can still be heard. 6 months ago, I had a stroke. Not the kind you recover from quickly. The kind that steals your voice, weakens your body, and traps you inside your own silence. I could still understand everything. I could still think clearly. But speaking? Even lifting my hand sometimes felt like moving a mountain. My son Daniel insisted I move into his house in Columbus, Ohio so he and his wife could take care of me. At first, I felt grateful. Daniel had always been a good boy. Gentle. Hardworking. The kind of man who would drive across town at midnight if someone needed help. But his wife, Ashley, she was different. Cold eyes. Perfect smile for strangers. But behind closed doors, something in her always felt sharp. Still, I told myself I was imagining things. Mothers of my generation learned to stay quiet. We don't want to create trouble between our children and their spouses. So when Daniel helped me settle into the small guest room at the end of the hallway, I thanked him with tears in my eyes. "I'll take care of you, Mom," he promised. And for the first few days, everything seemed fine. Ashley brought me soup. Daniel helped me sit up. They talked to me kindly, even though I could only respond with slow blinks and small movements. But kindness can fade quickly when someone thinks you're helpless. And Ashley believed exactly that. The first time she showed her true face was 2 weeks later. Daniel had left early for work. The house was quiet. Ashley walked into my room holding her phone, scrolling through something. She stood at the foot of my bed, staring at me. Then she laughed softly. "You know," she said, tilting her head, "people like you usually don't last long after a stroke." I couldn't answer. I couldn't even move my lips. She stepped closer. "You're basically a vegetable now," she continued casually. "Daniel just doesn't want to admit it." My chest tightened. Tears formed in my eyes, but I forced myself not to cry. Then she said something I will never forget. Something that still echoes in my mind every night. Ashley leaned down close enough for me to smell her perfume. And she whispered, "Actually, I already bought a burial plot for you." My heart started pounding so hard I thought it might stop. She smiled wider. "I even had the grave prepared last week," she said. "So honestly," she shrugged, "you should probably just die already. It would make things easier for everyone." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell my son what his wife had just said to me. But my mouth wouldn't move. My body wouldn't obey me. All I could do was lie there while tears rolled down the sides of my face. Ashley watched me cry, and she looked amused. "Oh, don't be dramatic," she said, walking toward the door. "It's not like you can tell anyone anyway." Before leaving, she turned back one more time and said the words that shattered whatever hope I still had. "Remember, Margaret," she said calmly, "your grave is already waiting." Then she switched off the light and left me alone in the dark. But what Ashley didn't know was that my body might have been weak. My voice might have been gone, but my mind was still very much alive. And as the weeks passed, I slowly began to notice something strange. Something that made my heart race with a new kind of fear. Because Ashley wasn't just waiting for me to die. No. She was trying to make sure it happened sooner. And the worst part? My own son had no idea what was happening right under his roof. But the day finally came when I found the strength to fight back. And the way I exposed her changed everything. Because one small piece of paper would destroy her entire life. And it all started the day my son walked into my room while Ashley wasn't home. And I realized I had one chance to tell him the truth. But first, I needed the strength to move my hand. Ashley thought I was completely helpless. To her, I was just an old woman trapped inside a broken body, someone who couldn't talk, couldn't move, and certainly couldn't fight back. But she was wrong about one thing. I could still see everything. I could still hear everything. And most importantly, I could still remember. What she did next is something I will never forget as long as I live. 3 days after she told me my grave was already waiting, Ashley came into my room earlier than usual. It was around noon. Daniel had already left for work. She was wearing sunglasses even though we were inside the house, and she had that same strange smile on her face. The one that always made my stomach twist. "Well, Margaret," she said cheerfully. "Today is a special day." I blinked slowly, trying to understand what she meant. She walked over to my bed and crossed her arms. "You should probably see it," she continued. My heart began beating faster. "See what?" Ashley leaned closer. "Your grave." For a moment I thought I had misunderstood her. But then she laughed. "Yes," she said casually. "I figured it would motivate you." My chest tightened. Before I could even process what was happening, she began adjusting the wheelchair beside my bed. She lifted me into it with rough, impatient movements. "You're lighter than I expected," she muttered. "Guess being useless burns calories." I wanted to protest. I wanted to ask why she was doing this. But my body refused to cooperate. All I could do was sit there as she pushed the wheelchair down the hallway. Outside, the autumn air was cold. The sky was gray, the kind of heavy cloudy sky that makes everything feel quiet and distant. Ashley helped me into the passenger seat of her car. Or rather, shoved me into it. She buckled the seatbelt with a sharp click and walked around to the driver's side. The engine started. For several minutes we drove in silence. I stared out the window, watching the houses disappear behind us. Then the city faded. Soon we were driving past empty roads and open fields. And suddenly, I realized where we were going. The cemetery. My heart began pounding so hard I thought she could hear it. Ashley noticed. She smiled. "Relax," she said lightly. "It's not like you're going anywhere." The cemetery sat on a quiet hill outside town. Tall oak trees surrounded it, their branches swaying slowly in the wind. Ashley parked near the entrance and walked around to pull out the wheelchair. Then she helped me out of the car and pushed me along the narrow gravel path. The sound of the wheels crunching against the stones echoed in the silence. Row after row of gravestones surrounded us. Some new, some worn and faded with time. Finally, Ashley stopped. She positioned my wheelchair in front of a small patch of freshly turned earth. My stomach dropped. A wooden marker stood in the dirt. And written on it, in black marker, were the words, "Margaret Collins." My name. My hands began shaking slightly. Ashley stepped beside me and crossed her arms proudly. "Nice right," she said. I stared at the grave. At the hole that had already been dug. At the name that was supposed to belong to someone still breathing. "This spot wasn't cheap," she continued casually. "But honestly, I see it as an investment." I felt tears forming in my eyes. Ashley crouched down beside me. "You're probably wondering why I'm doing this," she said quietly. She leaned closer. "So I'll tell you." Her voice dropped into a cold whisper. "When you die, Daniel gets your house." My heart skipped. "And when Daniel gets the house," she continued, smiling slowly, "we sell it." She tapped the wooden marker with her finger. $300,000, Margaret. Then she shrugged. "So really, the sooner you go, the better." Tears slid down my cheeks. Not because I feared death. At 78 years old, death is something you eventually make peace with. But because my own son's wife was waiting for it. Planning it. Maybe even hoping for it every single day. Ashley watched my tears and rolled her eyes. "Oh please," she sighed. "You're acting like I pushed you in there already." She stood up and brushed dirt from her jeans. "But give it time." Then she looked directly into my eyes. And said the words that chilled my blood. "Bodies like yours don't last long anyway." On the drive home, I didn't cry anymore. Something inside me had changed. Something quiet. Something determined. Because while Ashley believed I was dying, I had started to notice something she hadn't. My fingers. They had begun moving again. Very slightly. Just enough for me to feel it. just enough for hope to return. And over the next few days, that small movement would become the most dangerous secret in the house. Because if Ashley discovered I was recovering, things might become much worse. But if I stayed quiet, if I stayed patient, then one day soon, I might finally be able to tell my son the truth. And when that day came, Ashley would learn something she had completely forgotten. Old women may be quiet. Old women may be weak. But old women remember everything. And revenge sometimes comes very slowly. But what Ashley did the following week made me realize something even more terrifying. She wasn't just waiting for me to die. She had already started helping death along. And the first time I noticed it was when she brought me a bowl of soup that smelled strangely bitter and watched me carefully as I lifted the spoon, as if she was waiting for something to happen. The first time I realized my daughter-in-law might actually be trying to kill me, it was because of a bowl of soup. It sounds small when I say it like that. Just soup. But sometimes the smallest things carry the darkest intentions. And that afternoon, as I sat in my wheelchair by the window, I noticed something that made my heart begin to pound with a quiet, terrible understanding. Ashley was watching me too closely. It had been about a week since the day she showed me my own grave. A week since I stared at that wooden marker with my name written across it like I was already gone. But something had changed since then. My fingers were getting stronger. Not enough for anyone to notice. Not enough to speak. But enough to move. Just a little more each day. And Ashley didn't know. I made sure she didn't know. When she came into the room, I stayed limp and quiet. My hands resting still on the blanket. I let her believe what she wanted to believe. That I was helpless. That I was fading away. That the grave she bought would be used soon. But that afternoon, everything shifted. Ashley walked into my room carrying a tray. A white bowl sat on it, steam rising slowly into the air. "Lunchtime," she said flatly. Her voice sounded normal. But her eyes didn't. They looked focused. Too focused. She placed the tray on the small table beside my wheelchair and stirred the soup with a spoon. "Chicken and vegetable," she said. Then she glanced at me. "Doctor says soft foods are good for stroke patients." Her lips curved slightly. "Wouldn't want you choking before your time." My stomach twisted. I watched as she brought the spoon closer to my mouth. The smell reached me first. At first it seemed normal. But then, something bitter. Something chemical. Very faint. But it was there. And suddenly, a terrible thought entered my mind. Ashley lifted the spoon toward my lips. "Come on, Margaret," she said softly. "Eat." Her eyes were fixed on my face. Not in a caring way. In a waiting way. Like someone observing an experiment. My chest tightened. Was I imagining this? Was I becoming paranoid after everything she had done? Or was my instinct trying to warn me? I remembered something my own mother used to say when I was a little girl. Your body knows danger before your mind does. And right now my body felt like it was screaming. Ashley pushed the spoon closer. "Open your mouth," she said impatiently. For a moment I froze. If I refused, she might become suspicious. If I ate it, I might never wake up again. My fingers twitched slightly under the blanket. I prayed she didn't notice. Then I made the smallest decision of my life. I opened my mouth just enough. Ashley placed the spoon inside. The soup touched my tongue. And instantly, I knew. It tasted wrong. Not spoiled. Not burnt. Wrong. Bitter in a way food should never taste. Ashley leaned closer, watching carefully. I swallowed slowly. My throat burned faintly. Her eyes didn't leave my face. Seconds passed. Then she gave a small disappointed sigh. She muttered. My blood ran cold. She fed me another spoon. And another. Each time I forced myself to swallow slowly, pretending nothing was strange. Inside, my mind was racing. What had she put in the soup? Medicine? Something stronger? Was she trying to weaken me further? Or worse? Was she trying to make my death look natural? After the fifth spoon she stopped. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she smiled thinly. "Well," she said. "Maybe tomorrow." Tomorrow. The word echoed in my mind like thunder. Ashley stood up and took the tray. Before leaving the room, she turned back and looked at me again. "You know," she said casually. People your age sometimes pass away quietly in their sleep. She tilted her head. No pain. No drama. Then she added softly, that would really solve a lot of problems. And she walked out. The moment the door closed, my heart began racing. My fingers moved again under the blanket. Stronger this time. I forced my hand to lift slightly. Just an inch. It trembled violently, but it moved. Tears filled my eyes. Not from fear. From something else. Determination. Ashley believed she had all the power in this house. She believed I was dying. She believed I couldn't fight back. But what she didn't know was that every single day, my body was slowly waking up again. And the moment I could move my hand properly, everything would change. Because I had already made a promise to myself that night. If I survived whatever she was putting in my food, if my strength continued to return, then one day soon, when my son Daniel walked into my room, I would finally tell him the truth. Even if I had to write it with the last bit of strength in my body. Ashley thought she was waiting for my death. But she didn't realize something. The moment Daniel learned what she had done, her life in this house would be over. But what Ashley did 2 nights later proved something far more terrifying than poison. She walked into my room while she thought I was asleep, and made a phone call that revealed her real plan. And when I heard what she said on that call, I realized my life was in much greater danger than I ever imagined. 2 nights after the soup incident, I heard the truth. Not by accident, but because Ashley thought I was already too weak to notice anything. She thought I was asleep. She thought I was fading away. She thought wrong. And what I heard that night made my blood run colder than anything she had said before. Because it proved something terrible. Ashley wasn't just hoping I would die. She was planning it. It was almost midnight when I woke up. The house was quiet. Daniel had gone to bed hours earlier. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner in the hallway and the soft creak of the wooden floors settling in the night. I couldn't move much yet, but I had started waking up more often. My body was slowly rebuilding strength. Every day my fingers moved a little more. Every day my arm felt slightly lighter. Ashley hadn't noticed. She still treated me like a lifeless object sitting in a chair. But that night, something unusual happened. My bedroom door opened slowly. Very slowly. The hallway light spilled across the floor. And Ashley stepped inside. She didn't realize I was awake. My eyes were closed, my breathing slow and steady. I had learned to stay perfectly still when she entered the room. Ashley stood near the door for a moment, staring at me. Then she sighed. "You're still here," she muttered under her breath. Her footsteps moved across the room. I heard the soft rustle of her jacket. Then a faint electronic sound. Her phone. A second later, she began speaking quietly. "Yeah, it's me." Her voice was low, almost whispering. I stayed completely still. Every nerve in my body focused on listening. There was a pause while the person on the other end spoke. Then Ashley said something that made my heart skip. "No, not yet." Another pause. "I told you these things take time." My chest tightened. "What things?" Ashley began pacing slowly across the room. "She's stubborn," she continued. "The doctor said strokes usually take people out faster at her age." My fingers curled slightly under the blanket. She was talking about me. The person on the phone must have said something that annoyed her. Ashley exhaled sharply. "No, I'm not stupid," she snapped quietly. "I'm doing it carefully. Carefully." The word echoed in my mind. My stomach twisted. Then she said something even worse. "I already started reducing her medication," she whispered. My heart nearly stopped. Medication. I remembered the pills Daniel had placed on my bedside table when I first moved in. Blood pressure pills. Recovery medication. Medicine meant to help my brain heal. Had Ashley been taking them away? My breathing almost broke its rhythm. I forced myself to stay still. If she realized I was awake, I didn't know what she might do. Ashley stopped pacing. She lowered her voice even further. "Look, once she's gone, the house becomes Daniel's." My chest tightened again. "And when Daniel gets the house," she continued, "we sell it." There it was again. The house. The same thing she said at the cemetery. The person on the phone must have asked something else. Ashley laughed quietly. "No, he has no idea." Her voice carried a cold confidence. Daniel still thinks I'm taking care of her. I felt tears forming behind my closed eyelids. My son trusted her. He believed his wife was helping me recover. But the woman he trusted most was slowly pushing me toward death. Ashley's voice dropped even lower. We just need a little more time. A pause. Then she said the words that made my blood freeze completely. If the medication doesn't finish the job, there are other ways. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. Other ways. What did that mean? Poison? An accident? Something worse? Ashley sighed again. I'm telling you it'll look natural, she whispered. Old stroke patient passes in her sleep. Silence followed. Then she said one last sentence. Just trust me. She ended the call. For a moment she stood there in the darkness, staring at me. My heart pounded so loudly I thought she might hear it. Then she walked closer to my bed. Closer. Closer. Until I could feel her breath near my face. Any day now, Margaret, she murmured softly. Her voice was almost cheerful. You'll finally stop being a problem. Then she turned off the lamp and left the room. The door closed quietly behind her. The moment I heard her footsteps disappear down the hallway, my eyes opened. Tears rolled silently down my cheeks. But they weren't tears of fear anymore. They were tears of anger. Ashley thought I was dying. She thought she had all the time in the world. But she didn't know something critical. My strength was coming back faster than she realized. And now, I knew the truth. She wasn't just waiting for my death. She was helping it happen. That night, lying in the darkness, I made a decision. I would survive. No matter what it took. Because one day soon, Daniel would walk into my room. And when he did, I would find a way to tell him everything. Even if it meant writing it with trembling hands. Even if it meant using the last strength I had. Because Ashley had made one fatal mistake. She thought silence meant weakness. But silence can also mean patience. And 3 days later, when Daniel walked into my room unexpectedly one afternoon, I realized something incredible. For the first time since my stroke, my hand could finally hold a pen. And that small piece of paper I wrote on would change everything. 3 days after I heard Ashley's midnight phone call, my son Daniel walked into my room. And in that moment, I realized something that made my heart race with a desperate kind of hope. For the first time since my stroke, my hand could finally hold a pen. Not steadily, not strongly, but enough. Enough to do the one thing I had been praying for since the nightmare began. Tell my son the truth. It was a quiet afternoon. Ashley had left the house about an hour earlier. I heard her car pull out of the driveway, tires crunching against the gravel. She didn't say where she was going. She rarely did. Daniel had been working long hours lately. Sometimes he wouldn't come home until late at night. But that afternoon, something unexpected happened. The front door opened. I heard his familiar footsteps in the hallway. Mom, he called gently. My heart leapt inside my chest. He almost never came home this early. The door to my room opened. And there he was. My son, Daniel Collins, 39 years old. Tall, tired-looking, still wearing his work jacket. For a moment he just stood there watching me. His face softened the way it always had when he looked at me. Hey Mom, he said quietly. He walked over and knelt beside my wheelchair. How are you feeling today? His voice carried the same warmth it had when he was a little boy asking if I'd read him a bedtime story. Tears formed in my eyes immediately. I wanted to answer him. I wanted to tell him everything Ashley had done. But my voice still refused to cooperate. All that came out was a faint breath. Daniel sighed softly. I know, he said gently. It's been a tough recovery. Then he glanced around the room. Ashley said you had a quiet morning. My heart tightened. Ashley had been telling him stories, painting herself as the loving caregiver. While behind closed doors she was slowly destroying me. Daniel stood up and walked toward the small table beside my chair. That's when I saw it. A pen. And a box of tissues. Something inside me ignited. My hand twitched under the blanket. Daniel didn't notice at first. He was adjusting the curtains to let in more sunlight. But I focused every bit of strength I had into my arm. Slowly, painfully, my fingers moved. Then my wrist. My hand lifted a few inches from the blanket. It trembled violently, but it moved. Daniel turned back just in time to see it. His eyes widened. Mom. He stepped closer. Did you just move your hand? My heart pounded. This was it. My one chance. With shaking fingers, I reached toward the table. Daniel immediately understood something was happening. Wait, he said quickly. He grabbed the pen and the tissue box and placed them in front of me. Mom, can you write? I didn't know if I could, but I had to try. Daniel placed the pen gently between my fingers. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped it. But somehow, I held on. Slowly, painfully, I lowered the pen to the tissue. The tip scratched faintly against the thin paper. My hand felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Each letter took everything I had. Daniel leaned closer, watching silently. Concern spread across his face. Take your time, he whispered. My hand trembled again. But I kept going. One word at a time. Slow. Crooked. Barely readable. But enough. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I pushed the tissue toward him. Daniel picked it up carefully. His eyes moved across the shaky handwriting. And suddenly, his expression changed. At first there was confusion. Then disbelief. Then something else. Shock. Mom, he whispered. His hands tightened around the tissue. He read the words again. The message I had forced my broken hand to write. 3 simple sentences. Ashley poisoned food. Ashley stopped medicine. Ashley vont me dit. The room went completely silent. Daniel stared at the tissue like it might suddenly change. Then he looked at me. Mom, are you serious? I blinked twice. The only way I could say yes. His breathing grew heavier. He read the words again. Then something dark flashed across his face. Anger. Real anger. The kind I had never seen in him before. Daniel stood up so quickly the chair behind him nearly tipped over. This can't be true, he muttered. But his voice sounded less certain each second. He began pacing the room. Looking at the tissue. Looking at me. Thinking. Remembering. Suddenly he stopped. And whispered something that chilled the air in the room. She told me you were getting worse. My heart tightened. Daniel stared at the paper again. Then he said quietly. She told me the doctors said you might not make it through the winter. Slowly, his hands began to shake. Not with fear. With fury. Daniel grabbed his phone. I'm calling the doctor, he said. But before he could dial, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway echoed outside. Ashley was home. Daniel froze. The tissue still clenched tightly in his hand. Footsteps approached the front door. The lock clicked. And Ashley's voice floated into the house. Daniel? You're home early. My son looked at me one last time. His jaw tightened. And he folded the tissue carefully into his pocket. Because Ashley was about to walk into the room. Completely unaware that her secret had already been exposed. And in the next few minutes, her entire life was about to collapse. I told you, your grave is already ready. So why are you still alive? That sentence kept echoing in my head, even as I watched my son stand in the middle of my room with that tiny tissue folded tightly in his hand. The same tissue that held the truth. The truth Ashley had hidden so carefully. The truth I had almost died trying to reveal. And now, she was walking straight toward us. Daniel. Ashley's voice called from the hallway. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor. Calm. Confident. Completely unaware that everything had just changed. Daniel stood very still beside my wheelchair. His shoulders had stiffened. His jaw was clenched so tightly I could see the muscle twitch. But when Ashley stepped into the doorway, he forced a small smile. Oh hey, he said. Ashley appeared carrying 2 shopping bags. Her blonde hair perfectly styled, her face glowing with that same sweet expression she always used around my son. Wow, she laughed lightly. You're home early today. She placed the bags on the dresser and leaned down to kiss Daniel on the cheek. Then her eyes drifted toward me, and the moment she saw me holding the pen, something flickered across her face. Fear. Just for half a second. But I saw it. Oh, she said quickly, recovering her smile. Did Mom have a good day? Daniel nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. She did. Ashley crossed the room and bent down beside my wheelchair, placing a hand gently on my shoulder. The same fake tenderness she always showed when Daniel was watching. "Did you behave today, Margaret?" she asked sweetly. Her fingers squeezed my shoulder slightly harder than necessary. A warning. Her eyes looked directly into mine. And silently they said the same thing she had been saying for months. "Don't you dare." Daniel watched the entire exchange carefully. Every movement. Every glance. Then he spoke again. "Ashley, can I ask you something?" She stood up and smiled casually. "Of course." Daniel pulled his phone out of his pocket, pretending to check something. "Did the doctor call today about Mom's condition?" Ashley didn't hesitate. "No," she said smoothly. "Why?" Daniel shrugged. "Just wondering." Ashley sighed softly and shook her head. "You know what the doctor said already, Daniel. Her condition is declining." Her voice lowered dramatically. "It's heartbreaking, but we have to start preparing ourselves." Then she placed a gentle hand over her heart and whispered, "I don't think she has much time left." The room went silent. Daniel stared at her. Not saying anything. Just staring. Ashley tilted her head slightly. "What?" she asked with a small laugh. "You're looking at me like that again." Daniel slowly reached into his pocket. My heart began pounding so loudly, I thought everyone could hear it. Ashley noticed the movement too. Her smile faded slightly. "What's that?" she asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he unfolded the tissue. Carefully. Slowly. And held it out in front of her. Ashley's eyes dropped to the paper. At first, her face showed mild curiosity. Then confusion. Then complete shock. The color drained from her face. Her lips parted slightly as she read the words written in my shaky handwriting. "Ashley poisoned food. Ashley stopped medicine. Ashley vont me dit." For a moment nobody spoke. Then Ashley let out a small laugh. A forced one. "Oh my God," she said. "Daniel, you can't be serious." Daniel didn't laugh. His eyes were locked on her face. "Did you poison my mother?" Ashley's expression hardened. "Of course not," she snapped. "Daniel, she's sick. You know that. Stroke patients get confused. They hallucinate things." She pointed at the tissue dismissively. "She probably doesn't even know what she wrote." Daniel's voice turned colder. "She also wrote that you stopped giving her medicine." Ashley crossed her arms. "Daniel, I've been taking care of her day and night for 6 months." Her tone sharpened. "You think I'd do that if I wanted her dead?" Daniel didn't respond. Instead, he walked to the dresser and picked up the bottle of my medication. He turned it in his hand, then looked at Ashley again. "The doctor prescribed this twice a day." Ashley nodded. "Exactly." Daniel opened the bottle, and his expression changed immediately. It was almost full. Slowly, Daniel looked back at her. "Ashley," he said quietly, "this bottle was filled 3 weeks ago." Ashley blinked. "So?" Daniel's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "So there should only be a few pills left." He held the bottle up. "But it's almost full." The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush the entire room. Ashley opened her mouth, closed it, then tried to laugh again. Maybe the pharmacy made a mistake. Daniel took one slow step toward her, then another. His voice no longer sounded confused. Now it sounded furious. "Did you tell my mother her grave was already ready?" Ashley froze. Her eyes flickered toward me for the briefest second. And that was all Daniel needed to see. His face went pale. "Answer me." Ashley's voice cracked. But Daniel didn't let her finish. "Get out." She blinked. "What?" Daniel pointed toward the door. His voice thundered through the room. "Get out." Ashley stared at him like she didn't recognize the man standing in front of her. "Daniel, listen." I said, "Get out of this house." His hands were shaking now. Not with doubt. With rage. "You lied to me for months," he said. "You let my mother suffer while pretending to care for her." Ashley's face twisted. "She's turning you against me." Daniel stepped forward again. "She can barely move, Ashley." His voice cracked. "And she still found a way to tell me the truth." Ashley grabbed her purse from the dresser. Her eyes burned with anger now. "You'll regret this," she spat. "You're choosing a dying old woman over your own wife." Daniel didn't hesitate. "Yes." The word landed like a hammer. Ashley stared at him one last time, then stormed out of the room. Moments later the front door slammed so hard the entire house shook. And just like that, the woman who had tried to bury me alive was gone. Daniel turned back toward me slowly. His eyes were filled with guilt and tears. He knelt beside my wheelchair and whispered the words I had been waiting months to hear. Mom, I'm so sorry. But what he said next would change both of our lives forever. And it would prove that Ashley's punishment had only just begun. I'm so sorry, Mom. Those were the words my son whispered as he knelt beside my wheelchair, his hands trembling. But the truth is, I wasn't thinking about apologies. I was thinking about the grave. The grave my daughter-in-law had proudly told me about. The grave she said was already waiting for me. And for the first time since that horrifying day, I realized something. Ashley never expected me to survive long enough to tell anyone. Daniel stayed beside me for a long time that afternoon. Longer than he had in months. He held my hand carefully, like he was afraid I might break. I should have seen it, he kept saying quietly. I should have known something wasn't right. Tears filled his eyes. I trusted her, Mom. My heart hurt seeing my son like that. Daniel had always been a good man. Too good maybe. Too trusting. Ashley had taken advantage of that kindness. But now the truth was finally out. And Ashley was gone. Or at least, that's what we both thought. That night, Daniel insisted on cooking dinner himself. The house felt different. Lighter. For the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of what would happen when night came. Daniel helped me take my medication properly. He even called my doctor and scheduled an appointment for the next morning. You're going to get stronger, he told me firmly. We're fixing this, Mom. I promise. I wanted to believe him. But part of me still felt uneasy, because Ashley had said something else that day. She bragged about my grave. Something that kept replaying in my mind. Something cruel. Something cold. She had said, Daniel already paid for it. Late that evening, Daniel came back into my room with his laptop. He looked troubled. Mom, he said slowly, I need to check something. He sat down in the chair beside me and began typing. I watched his face carefully. At first he looked confused. Then his eyebrows slowly pulled together. Then his eyes widened. And suddenly he whispered, Oh my God. My heart began racing. Daniel turned the screen toward me. On the screen was a receipt. From a cemetery. And at the top of the page were the words, Prearranged burial plot, Margaret Collins. My name. My stomach dropped. Daniel scrolled down the document. The payment had been made 2 months earlier. Total cost, $8,500. And under the signature line, Ashley's name. She told me it was for future planning, Daniel muttered. I thought she was just being responsible. His voice cracked. But she already chose the plot. He kept scrolling. And then he froze. Because the document included something else. A photograph. A picture of the burial site. Fresh soil. A new headstone. Already installed. Daniel's hands began shaking again. The stone read, Margaret Collins. Beloved mother. Below that, my birth year. And a blank space for the year of my death. I felt tears sliding down my cheeks. Ashley hadn't just been threatening me. She had actually prepared my grave. Daniel suddenly slammed the laptop shut. That's it, he said. I'm going there tomorrow. His eyes were burning now. I want to see it myself. The next morning, Daniel drove us to the cemetery. It was a quiet place outside the city. Rolling hills. Tall oak trees. Rows and rows of silent gravestones stretching into the distance. A cold wind brushed across my face as Daniel pushed my wheelchair along the narrow stone path. We walked for several minutes before Daniel stopped. He looked down at a small map printed on the receipt. Then he looked ahead. And suddenly, he froze. Because about 20 feet away was my grave. The soil was still fresh. The headstone stood clean and polished in the morning sunlight. Daniel slowly pushed my wheelchair closer. Neither of us spoke. When we reached it, Daniel crouched down in front of the stone. His hands touched the engraved letters of my name. And then, my son started crying. I'm so sorry, Mom, he whispered again. I let her do this to you. But as I stared at that grave, something inside me changed. Because suddenly I realized something powerful. Ashley had dug this grave expecting me to die. But instead, I was standing there, alive, looking down at the place meant to bury me. And that meant something else. Ashley had made a very big mistake. Because now, that grave wasn't a symbol of my death anymore. It was proof. Proof of what she tried to do. And Daniel understood that too. He stood up slowly and wiped his eyes. Then he pulled out his phone. "I'm calling a lawyer," he said. My heart skipped. Ashley thought the worst thing that could happen was being thrown out of the house. But Daniel's voice was calm, cold, determined. No one tries to bury my mother alive and walks away from it. And what happened next was something Ashley never saw coming. Because within a week, the woman who had prepared my grave would be standing in a courtroom, facing consequences far worse than divorce. The woman who told me, "Your grave is ready. Now just die," had no idea that one day she would be the one standing in front of a judge. But that's exactly what happened. 1 week after Daniel discovered the grave Ashley had prepared for me, we were sitting inside a courtroom, and the entire truth was finally about to come out. The lawyer Daniel hired was a calm, serious woman named Rebecca Carter. The first time she came to our house, she sat beside my wheelchair and spoke very gently. "Mrs. Collins," she said, "Daniel told me everything." She looked at the tissue I had written on, the one that had changed everything. Then she said something that surprised both of us. "This is bigger than just divorce." Daniel looked at her carefully. "What do you mean?" Rebecca leaned forward. "If Ashley intentionally withheld medication and attempted to harm your mother, that's criminal." The word hung in the air like thunder. Criminal. Daniel's jaw tightened. "So what do we do?" Rebecca closed her folder slowly. "We prove it." The next few days moved quickly. Daniel contacted my doctor, and the doctor confirmed something terrifying. My condition hadn't been getting worse naturally. It had been getting worse because I wasn't receiving the medication prescribed to help my recovery. The doctor even said something that made Daniel's hands shake. If she had continued missing these doses, she could have died. That sentence alone was enough to make Daniel furious. But Rebecca wanted more proof. And that's when Daniel remembered something. The security cameras. Ashley had installed cameras around the house months earlier. She said they were for safety. But Daniel had access to the recordings. When he opened the footage from the kitchen, what we saw made my heart sink. The camera showed Ashley preparing my food. But instead of adding my medication powder into the soup the way the doctor instructed, she quietly poured it down the sink. Then she stirred the soup and carried it to my room with a bright smile. "Here you go, Margaret," she had said sweetly. Watching that recording made Daniel slam his fist on the table. "She tried to kill you," he whispered. Rebecca didn't look surprised. She simply said, "That video will be very useful in court." Ashley was served with divorce papers 2 days later. But that wasn't the only thing she received. Rebecca had also filed a report for elder abuse and medical neglect. Ashley tried to call Daniel dozens of times. He never answered. She even showed up at the house once, banging on the door and screaming. But Daniel had already changed the locks. And eventually, the court date arrived. The courtroom was quiet that morning. Ashley sat at the defendant's table, wearing a perfectly pressed black dress. She looked calm, confident, almost bored. When she saw me being wheeled inside beside Daniel, she smirked slightly, like she still believed she would win. But she had no idea what Rebecca had prepared. When the hearing began, Ashley's lawyer stood up first. He painted a very different story. He claimed Ashley had been a devoted caregiver overwhelmed by stress. He even suggested my accusations were the result of confusion caused by my stroke. At one point he said, "Mrs. Collins unfortunately suffers from cognitive difficulties." Daniel's hands clenched. But Rebecca simply stood up and calmly said, "Your Honor, we have video evidence." The room went silent. The courtroom lights dimmed as the screen turned on. And suddenly, everyone in the room watched Ashley standing in the kitchen, pouring my medication into the sink. 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. Day after day. The silence in the courtroom became suffocating. Ashley's confident expression slowly disappeared. Her lawyer looked like he had swallowed a rock. When the video ended, Rebecca spoke again. Your Honor, we also have evidence that the defendant purchased a burial plot for Mrs. Collins while simultaneously withholding life-saving medication. Then she placed the cemetery receipt on the judge's desk. The same receipt Daniel had shown me, the one with my name engraved on a headstone. The judge adjusted his glasses and stared directly at Ashley. Mrs. Bennett, he said slowly, using her married name. Do you deny these accusations? Ashley opened her mouth, closed it, then tried to speak. I was just trying to help her pass peacefully. Gasps filled the courtroom. Even her own lawyer looked stunned. Daniel stood up so suddenly his chair nearly fell. You tried to bury my mother alive, he shouted. The judge slammed his gavel. Order in the court. But the damage was already done. Ashley had just confessed. The judge leaned back in his chair and shook his head slowly. I have presided over many disturbing cases, he said. But planning someone's burial while intentionally denying them medication. He paused. That is cruelty beyond comprehension. Ashley's face turned pale. And for the first time since this nightmare began, she looked afraid, because the judge's next words would determine her fate. And what he said next would shock everyone in that courtroom, including Ashley herself. The courtroom was completely silent. Ashley stood there frozen after the words slipped out of her mouth. I was just trying to help her pass peacefully. The moment she said that, everyone in the room understood what it meant. She had just admitted it. Not fully, not directly, but enough. Enough for the truth to be clear. And the judge knew it. The judge leaned forward slowly, folding his hands together as he looked at Ashley. His voice was calm, but there was a weight behind every word. Mrs. Bennett, he said firmly. Do you understand the seriousness of what you just admitted? Ashley's face had gone completely pale. Her lawyer quickly leaned toward her and whispered something urgently. But it was too late. The courtroom had heard it. Everyone had heard it. The judge continued. You withheld prescribed medication from a vulnerable elderly woman. You prepared a burial plot for her. And you continued this behavior for months. He paused, his eyes sharp. That is not caregiving. His voice hardened. That is abuse. Daniel sat beside me, gripping the arm of his chair so tightly his knuckles had turned white. I could see the anger in his eyes, but also the heartbreak. Because the woman standing across the courtroom had once been his wife. The woman he trusted. The woman he believed loved our family. But now, she was someone none of us recognized. Ashley suddenly stood up. No, she cried. Her calm mask had completely shattered. You're all twisting this. Her voice shook with panic. She was already dying. The doctors said she might not recover. The judge raised an eyebrow. Mrs. Bennett, he said slowly. That does not give you the right to decide when someone dies. Ashley's breathing grew heavier. Her eyes darted around the courtroom like she was searching for an escape. But there wasn't one. Rebecca calmly stood and handed the judge another document. Your Honor, we would also like to present medical testimony confirming that Mrs. Collins' condition improved significantly once she began receiving her medication properly again. The judge reviewed the document quietly. Then he nodded. Daniel looked at me. His eyes were filled with relief. Because that document proved something very important. I hadn't been dying. I had been recovering. Ashley had just been trying to stop that recovery. The judge finally placed the papers down. Then he looked directly at Ashley. His expression had changed. There was no sympathy left there. Only disappointment. Mrs. Bennett, he said. Elder abuse is a serious criminal offense in this state. Ashley's lawyer stood quickly. Your Honor, my client. The judge raised his hand. Sit down. The lawyer slowly lowered himself back into his chair. The judge continued. In addition to the divorce proceedings, I am referring this case for criminal investigation. Ashley's eyes widened. No, wait. But the judge wasn't finished. Based on the evidence presented, I am also issuing a protective order. He turned slightly toward Daniel and me. Mrs. Bennett is prohibited from contacting or approaching Margaret Collins or Daniel Collins in any way. The gavel lifted into the air, and then came down with a sharp crack. Court is adjourned. Ashley collapsed back into her chair. Her face looked completely drained of color. The confident woman who once whispered to me that my grave was ready was gone. Now she just looked scared, lost, and suddenly very small. As the courtroom began to empty, Daniel stood beside my wheelchair. For a moment he simply stared at Ashley, not with anger anymore, but with something else. Disappointment. Then he spoke quietly. "You could have been part of this family," he said. Ashley didn't answer. She just stared at the floor. Daniel turned away and began pushing my wheelchair toward the exit. For the first time in months, the sunlight outside felt warm on my face. Free. A few weeks later, the divorce was finalized. Ashley lost everything she thought she had secured. The house, the financial support, and most importantly, the trust she had once been given. Daniel sold the burial plot she had bought for me. He joked that it felt strange canceling his mother's grave while she was still alive. But for me, it felt like closing the door on the darkest chapter of my life. My recovery continued slowly after that. Every week my strength improved a little more. And one evening, something incredible happened. I spoke my first full sentence since the stroke. Daniel had just brought me tea when I looked at him and said softly, "Thank you for believing me." He froze. Then tears filled his eyes. "Mom, you talked." We both started laughing and crying at the same time. But the most powerful moment came a few months later. Daniel took me back to the cemetery one last time. Not to visit a grave, but to prove something to both of us. We stood together in front of the empty patch of grass where my headstone had once stood. And Daniel smiled. "Looks a lot better without your name on it," he said. I nodded slowly, because that place had once been meant to bury me. But instead, it became the place where my life started again. And if you're watching this story right now, remember one thing. Sometimes the people who try to bury you the fastest are the ones who accidentally prove how strong you really are. But what happened to Ashley after the criminal investigation was something none of us expected. And when I heard the news about her months later, even I was shocked. My daughter-in-law once told me, "Your grave is ready, now all you have to do is die." But months later, I was the one still alive, and she was the one whose life had completely fallen apart. A few months passed after the court hearing. My life slowly began to change for the better. The medication started working the way it was supposed to. Physical therapy helped me regain strength in my arms. And little by little, my voice returned. Not perfectly, not quickly, but enough that I could finally talk to my son again. For Daniel, that meant everything. Sometimes he would sit beside me at the kitchen table just listening to me speak simple sentences. "You're getting stronger every week, Mom," he would say with a proud smile. And for the first time in a long time, I actually believed it. Ashley disappeared from our lives after the divorce. No calls. No messages. No attempts to come back. The protective order made sure of that. For a while, Daniel and I didn't hear anything about her. And honestly, we didn't want to. We were finally healing. Finally moving forward. But then one afternoon, something unexpected happened. Daniel came home from work holding his phone with a strange expression on his face. He looked surprised. Almost confused. "Mom," he said slowly, sitting down across from me. "I just heard something about Ashley." My heart skipped slightly. I hadn't thought about her in weeks. "What happened?" I asked carefully. Daniel hesitated for a moment. Then he sighed. "You're not going to believe this." Apparently the criminal investigation the judge ordered had continued after the court hearing. Detectives reviewed the security footage. They interviewed doctors. They even looked at Ashley's online searches. And what they discovered was disturbing. Ashley had searched things like, "How long can someone live after a stroke without medication?" and "How to speed up natural death in elderly patients." When Daniel told me that, I felt a chill run through my body. Because it proved something terrifying. Ashley hadn't just been careless. She had planned everything. The investigators eventually charged her with elder abuse and medical neglect. It wasn't the kind of crime that usually leads to very long prison sentences. But it was still serious enough to destroy her reputation. Ashley lost her job soon after the charges became public. Her employer said they couldn't keep someone accused of abusing a vulnerable person. Friends stopped talking to her. Even some members of her own family distanced themselves. The life she once bragged about, the comfortable life she believed she had secured, collapsed piece by piece. Daniel looked at me carefully after telling me everything. I don't feel happy about it, he admitted. But I also don't feel sorry for her. I understood exactly what he meant. Revenge hadn't been my goal. All I wanted was the truth to come out. And it had. A few weeks later, something happened that surprised me even more. I received a letter. Not from a lawyer. Not from the court. But from Ashley. Daniel opened it carefully and read it aloud to me. Her words were short. Uncomfortable. Almost awkward. She wrote, "I know you'll never forgive me. But I want you to know I regret what I did. I was angry, selfish, and cruel. I convinced myself you were already dying. That doesn't excuse anything. I just needed to say I'm sorry." Daniel lowered the letter slowly. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Finally he asked quietly, "Do you want to respond?" I thought about it. For a long time. Then I shook my head gently. No. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't anger. It's simply living. Months later, Daniel and I returned to the cemetery one final time. Not to visit a grave, but to stand in the place where my grave had once been. The headstone Ashley ordered was long gone. The burial plot had been sold to someone else. Now it was just an empty piece of grass under the wide blue sky. Daniel looked at it and smiled. "You know something, Mom?" "What?" I asked. He pointed at the ground. "She prepared that place thinking it was the end of your story." I looked at the grass gently moving in the wind. Then I smiled too. "But it wasn't the end." Daniel nodded. "No," he said. "It was the moment everything turned around. Today, I'm still recovering. Still getting stronger. Still learning to speak clearly again. But every morning when I wake up, I remember something important. The woman who once told me to hurry up and die is no longer part of my life. And the grave she prepared for me remains empty. And if you've stayed with my story until the end, let me tell you something from the heart. Sometimes the people who try to destroy you believe you are weak. They think you won't fight back. They think no one will believe you. But the truth has a strange way of surviving. Just like I did. So if this story touched your heart, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because there are many more real-life stories like this waiting to be told. And remember one thing. No matter how deep someone digs a grave for you, your story isn't over until you decide it is.